Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Walk With Us. We are still continuing Colossians 3. We're finishing up Colossians 3 this week, and we're so glad you're back with us once again. So join us, if you would, in chapter 3, verse 18, where Paul says to the Colossians, in some rules for the Christian household, as he encourages them to apply the things he's taught them practically in their homes. He says, "Wives, submit to your husbands as is fitting in the Lord. Husbands, love your wives and do not be harsh with them. Children, obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord. Fathers, do not provoke your children, lest they become discouraged. Bondservants, obey in everything those who are your earthly masters, not by way of eye service as people pleasers, but with sincerity of heart, fearing the Lord. Whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. You are serving the Lord Christ, for the wrongdoer will be paid back for the wrong he has done, and there is no partiality. Masters, treat your bondservants justly and fairly, knowing that you also have a master in heaven." And so we see Paul start to apply the principles he's given to the Colossian church practically in a home, in a lifestyle of these Christians. And so he begins with wives and husbands, that wives should submit to their husbands as is fitting to the Lord, showing their ability to choose to submit or not submit, not in their lesser humanity in any way, as some have attempted to manipulate these ideas, these biblical ideas, and manipulate them to be patriarchal or misogynistic, people like to say. That's not what Paul is trying to articulate here, but rather that wives are to submit to their husbands as is fitting in the Lord, as God has called for in the headship role of husbands. And likewise, husbands are to love their wives and not to be harsh with them. And this love is not a desire to simply romantically desire their wives or to sexually like the way their wives look, but it is a love that serves. It is a love that Christ loves. It's a way that Christ loves his church, his bride. It's a self-sacrificial love. It's a love that seeks their interests. And that is how a husband is to relate to his wife, and how a wife is to submit to her husband is within that similar covenant. Likewise, children are told to obey their parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord. We live in a culture where children become more autonomous by the day, and they aren't encouraged to submit to their parents or to respect their parents or revere their parents. And so now Paul is able to encourage children that are Christian children to obey their parents as the Lord calls them to, as it pleases the Lord, as they've been placed in authority over them. And that's a beautiful thing. And likewise, fathers are given the encouragement, however, not to abuse this power, not to enrage their children, not to rile them up or use their power simply as a whip or a thing to be pushed down on their children, but to love their children and to not provoke them, not to simply provoke them and come down on them simply for the sake of doing so, but to encourage their children, not the opposite, not becoming discouraged by their acts. Then Paul continues, "Bondservants, obey in everything those who are your earthly masters. Serve as if you're serving unto the Lord," because you can know that not only are you serving unto the Lord, but your masters are called unto the Lord. And so Paul later says, masters, understand that you have a master who is in heaven. And there's all of these ideas of how we can submit to people knowing that ultimately they must submit to the Lord and will be held accountable for that. And knowing that we are ultimately serving the Lord in those things. Because we know that when we work, Paul says in verse 23, "Whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. You are serving the Lord Christ, for the wrongdoer will be paid back for the wrong he has done, and there is no partiality." Oftentimes we think at work that we are just to cut corners and get the fastest way to get job done and get out of there, when really we have to take the high road. We often ought to take, and every time ought to take, the road that gives God the most glory, that seeks first what we ought to do as reverence for the Lord. Our work is to be done unto him. So practically, what does that look like? Well, first and foremost, in work, that means seeking the highest standards, doing the highest quality, knowing we aren't serving merely an owner or a manager or a supervisor, but we are serving the Lord. And that changes our perspective. I shared with you on one of my Instagram videos the other day that I was just encouraged in that, and I was convicted of that I have to reset my standards every day to serve the Lord. Because our latent function is not to just serve the Lord. A lot of times our latent function is to serve ourselves. Our resulting function, our defaulting, is often to be self-seeking. When our desire to be the Lord and our respect unto the Lord is to be self-sacrificial and to serve unto him, even in work. And so that's a beautiful thing. And so we see all of these ideas. And that we can see now that the theology that Paul related to them, the theology of who Christ is, the theology of who God is and what the gospel has done in the Colossian church, and what that ought to look like in bearing fruit, and all of these ideas now comes to a head, even in the home. And so let Paul's words be my words today. Wives, submit to your husbands as is fitting in the Lord. Husbands, love your wives and do not be harsh with them. Children, obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord. Fathers, do not provoke your children, lest they become discouraged. Bondservants, obey in everything those who are your earthly masters, not by way of eye service as people pleasers, but with sincerity of heart, fearing the Lord. Whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. You are serving the Lord Christ. For the wrongdoer will be paid back for the wrong he has done, and there is no partiality. But ultimately, let us remember that in everything that we do, we serve a master who is in heaven, who is a loving Father, who calls us to be like him.